Imagine a scientist looking at you, studying your features, and assigning you a score, one that determines whether or not you belong or whether or not you're something less than. In 1885, John Beddoe, a leading British anthropologist, did just that. He created something called the Index of Nigrescence, literally a scale of blackness. If you were Irish, the science was not on your side.
And when Irish eyes are smiling, sure they'd steal your heart away.
What if I told you that just 150 years ago, the Irish were not considered fully white? Their skulls were measured, their hair color ranked, and their entire identity questioned. This isn't some obscure footnote in history. It was mainstream science. If you've ever looked at an old 19th century newspaper, you would see racial classification charts. And you might expect to see prejudices at the time against African Americans or Brits with African ancestry, but right next to those, you would see an Irishman. They were drawn with exaggerated, almost ape-like features and labeled as something less than fully human. And this wasn't just racist propaganda. Like I said, it was science with a capital S. And it shaped everything. The jobs that Irish immigrants could get, how they were treated in America, and even the stories that were or weren't passed down in families, including mine. And the fact that this history has been erased is not an accident. Hi, I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel where we talk about American identity and family stories. And part of my family story connects to Ireland. Most of the videos on this channel are about my journey of connecting to my mom's Louisiana roots. Her gram was born in Louisiana, of mixed ancestry, but her gram married an Irish boy from New York. That side of this family, it's been harder for me to trace, but it's been really rewarding and shocking at the same time. In the 19th century, race wasn't about skin color. It was about power. Scientific racism, the attempt to use science to justify racial hierarchies, was everywhere. And this was not a fringe belief. This was mainstream. This was everywhere. It was published in newspapers, taught in universities, and used to justify policies that shaped millions of lives. Now, one of the most popular forms of this pseudoscience was something called phrenology, this idea that the skull shape determines intelligence and moral character, and scientists would measure jaw angles, forehead slopes, facial structures to argue some groups are naturally superior, some are inferior. If you were Irish, the science was not on your side. I spent a lot of time on the Library of Congress website, which is amazing. I love the Library of Congress. You can get on there, search through primary sources. I was flipping through really old books on phrenology. It was just amazing to immerse myself in the way people perceived the world at the time. Imagine a scientist looking at you, studying your features, and assigning you a score, one that determines whether or not you belong or whether or not you're something less than. In 1885, John Beddoe, a leading British anthropologist, did just that. He created something called the Index of Nigrescence, literally a scale of blackness. He studied 13,000 men and he ranked them based on just their hair color. And this is how he assigned points. He said, if you have red hair or blonde hair, you get 1 point. If you have brown or chestnut, you're neutral. If you have dark hair, 1 point. Black hair, 2 points. And so when he mapped out his findings, he decided that the Irish, along with the Welsh and the Scots, were ranked as significantly darker than the Anglo-Saxons. In his conclusion, the Irish weren't truly white, and they were a separate lower race than the Anglo-Saxons. They were more primitive, more emotional, and less capable of self-governance, which I think is kind of like a real doozy to throw in there. Right? So this wasn't just an academic theory. There were real-world repercussions. This was used to justify discrimination. It shaped how the Irish were viewed in Britain, which is a massive history all on its own, right? And how they were treated in America, which is what we're going to get to. But if you think that sounds extreme, consider what Charles Kingsley, who was a well-respected historian and clergyman, read pastor, wrote after he visited Ireland. He said, quote, "I am haunted by the human chimpanzees I saw there in Ireland. But to see white chimpanzees is dreadful. If they were black, one would not feel it so much." He wasn't alone. British political cartoons, especially Punch magazine, regularly depicted the Irish with ape-like features, framing them as violent, animalistic, inferior, drunkards. But this wasn't just a British view.
Nothing, I'm just enjoying this vivid display of Irish character.
These ideas followed immigrants across the Atlantic Ocean. You see a lot of these political cartoons in America as well. When the Irish immigrants arrived in the US, they faced open hostility at times. They weren't immediately accepted as white or the possibility of becoming American. They were met with the no Irish need apply signs in job postings. I know been some like discussion about whether or not that's real. It is most certainly real. I have a newspapers.com subscription, which is amazing. And you could search through old papers. In just a 2-second search, I was able to come up with a bunch of ads that said in them, like, don't apply if you're Irish. Just straight up don't. The Irish were portrayed in America as dangerous, criminal, lazy, and many Americans questioned whether the Irish were even fit for citizenship. There's a political cartoon I'm thinking of. I don't have it printed out, but I'll put it on the screen. Basically, it's Lady Liberty there. She's stirring this big pot. This is the American melting pot. And you see all these different people kind of being put in there. And they're all blending together, except there's one guy standing in the back that seems kind of out of control. I think he has like his arms up in the air. He's yelling. He's pugnacious. He's not agreeable. He's not folding in, and he's Irish. And I think the caption says something to that effect of like, you know, this is the one group that can't really become Americans. How amazing to hear that talk. You know, when we talk about the Irish now, you wouldn't think of it as, oh, well, these guys can't really become Americans. I mean, they're as American as anyone, right? But that's not how they were perceived when they first came here. And many Irish immigrants distanced themselves from other marginalized groups to try to protect themselves, especially Black Americans. They did begin to align themselves politically with white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, even though most of them, like my family, were Catholic. My great-great-grandpa came over from Northern Ireland, and he was Catholic, which is a whole history there. But the Irish did begin to adopt the language and the customs here, and the process wasn't immediate, but it did work. Another thing that I had read about was the Irish, especially in Boston, New York, which is where you find a lot of Irish Americans, so, you know, as police officers, as firefighters, and kind of becoming foundational parts of the community, and that helped that identity shift as well. So why does this history matter, though, today? Because I think it shows that one race is not really about skin color. It's about power. The Irish were not always seen as white. They were not even seen as full people. They weren't seen as people who could ever become Americans. And the fact that the Irish Americans were once placed near the bottom of the racial hierarchy, only later to climb closer to the top, proves that this is not a fixed category. It's a tool. It's malleable. It's used to divide, to exclude, to destroy, and control people. And if we don't recognize that, we risk repeating the same patterns that once left the Irish immigrants on the margins of society. Most Irish Americans don't know that their ancestors were once seen as like truly racially different. And I would say even a step beyond when you see these portrayals of the Irish as like apes. I mean, it's the same kind of garbage that you see with Africans, you see with Italians. There's this idea of like, these guys are so low, they're half animal. But now that you do, what do you make of it? History has a way of shaping the present, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we understand it or not. So let me know what you think about this. If you have Irish heritage, if you know about this history, if you'd like to watch any other videos that I've done on the Irish American experience, I will link to those below. And if you'd like to connect with me off of YouTube, I'd love to have you join me over at patreon.com/NYTN. Otherwise, we'll talk soon.